All right, the second class of the spring semester, looking at the book of Matthew. Last week we talked about the genealogy, the virgin birth, the importance of that, the curse that was on the line of Joseph, as in Mary and Joseph, not the Old Testament Joseph. What had taken place there. Then in chapter 2, we'll look at the wise men. Chapter 1 is mostly genealogy, and there's some important things there, but for the sake of time throughout the semester, looking at chapter 2, the wise men. Every single nativity scene that I have ever seen has the wise men there at the manger, and they were not there. They didn't come until probably about 2 years after. They went to Bethlehem, but they remember they went to the house where Jesus was at when they went. And Jesus was not born in a house; he was born in a manger, a stable outside. And when they came, Jesus was already a young child. He was about 2 years old. And we see that because Herod put out a decree that all the babies be killed from 2 years old and younger. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that he fit into that. So I'm not saying Jesus was exactly 2 years old, and he may have only been a year and a half, or I guess a year could be possible. But Herod wanted to make sure that he got him, so he went beyond the exact age, whether you're younger or older. I believe the possible heritage of the wise men, and I circled that and emphasize the word possible, because I believe that this is where the wise men came from. Now, when I went to Israel, I was in Bethlehem, and there at the place where they believe the manger was, and the manger wasn't anything like we think of today. Because we used to think of a wooden manger, look like a baby crib kind of thing with straw on it, and little baby Jesus laying in the straw like that. But it says, in Luke chapter 2, Luke chapter 2, verse 16. And they came with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the babe lying in a manger. Right? By wording that, what does that mean? That means everybody was lying in the manger. Right? Mary, Joseph, and the babe were lying in the manger. And because the manger, if what I saw was the actual place, and we don't always know that. You go to Israel, you'll see some sites and say this is where Jesus was born, or this is where he was baptized, whatever. And they're just not true. And most of those actually are owned by the Catholic Church, and they're just for tourism, trying to get their money kind of thing. Some places, though, can be somewhat verified. Like the picture I have back there above the microwave, I believe is the tomb. I really believe that. And the reason I do, it fits all biblical qualifications for it. It's right there. You can, if you walk away from the tomb and look up, you can see Golgotha, the place of skull. They found the olive press there, and that's what Garden of Gethsemane was, olive press. So it fits everything. And somewhere in the year 100 or so, the Byzantine church was placed there. They put a baptismal pool out in the courtyard of that area, and they marked on the wall that they believed that's where Jesus, his body had laid for 3 days. Well, these people, their grandparents or parents may have been alive at that time, and so that they say that. Now, the church in Bethlehem that's there, I don't believe that the church has anything to do with it, but there is a mosaic in one of the floors there that has been there from the early church, the Byzantine churches, that indicate wise men, all dressed up, because it's a mosaic, so it's in color, dressed up in garments that were similar to the Persian garments. Right? So that means that they believe, and the Bible says they came from the east, and that would be where that was at. So that kind of fits the qualification too. And the rock, there's a huge rock there that is about the height of this table, I guess, maybe a little bit lower, that they said that was used for a manger. Because a manger was where they would just put the food. The cows come up or whatever, they come up, they don't have to go all the way down, they just be right off the shelf there. And it would be big enough for Mary and Joseph and the babe to be lying in the manger. I mean, we tend to think it was Mary and Joseph were there and then the babe was lying in the manger, but the Bible actually says, indicates all three could have been lying in the manger there. So, that being said, the wise men coming from the east, I've read so many commentaries and Sunday school material that says that the wise men were astrologers who worshiped the stars, and they were out worshiping stars one night and saw an unusual star that they'd never seen, and so they searched after that star. But we do know that when they got to Jerusalem, they inquired about the baby. They're not inquiring about the stars so much as they're inquiring about the baby. And then they're told where, well, the Bible does say, the religious leaders there, they said, well, the Bible does say that he'd be born in Bethlehem, and so it's over that way. And so they have to go over that way. And that got Herod to thinking, we might be in trouble here. I need to kill these babies to worship him. So the identity of these wise men then? Well, if that mosaic is correct and they had Persian garbs, that makes sense. Because in the days of Daniel, and the prophecy of Daniel indicated when Jesus would die. It did not indicate when he would be born. Right? We know that he died right at the age of 33. Right? I believe he was born in March or April. In fact, this is a guess. Just a guess, and I can't prove this in any way whatsoever. But I do know this, that the Passover, that Jesus had to be taken off the cross for Passover. So we know when he's placed in the tomb. Jesus, we know, is our Passover lamb. Well, the qualification of a Passover lamb is that he was chosen on the first month, the 10th day. So I think it's possible that Jesus could have been born the first month, the 10th day, as the Passover lamb. Now, can I prove that? No. But I'd like to think I was, it's either that or 364 other days. But what we do know is that it makes sense that around March, April, we do know that it would make sense for Caesar Augustus to put out a decree in the rough weather months, the winter kind of thing, because people couldn't travel as much. So it makes more sense it would be in the first of the year, around spring. And of course, the death, we do know that the shepherds watch their flocks by night. Where we get our Christmas tree from on 158, the guy has sheep. And we were there to get the Christmas tree, and we noticed the sheep, they had paint on the side of one. Some were red and some were blue, I think it was, or whatever, two different colors. So I asked him about that. He said, well, these are the ones that have been impregnated, and these are the ones that are not, and also we can keep track of those. And I said, so when do they give birth? He said, well, they will sheep usually give birth around March, April, somewhere around that time. And I said, so? I said, that kind of goes along with the Bible story of Jesus being born, the crucifixion being time of Passover. Birth, yes, the birth, being around the first of the year, around March, April. So that would fit, wouldn't it? He said, yeah, it would. And he said, because that's the way it would be even in Israel, what have you. It's not important the day he was born, because if it were, we would know exactly. And I do know December 25th, it was a pagan holiday. It was the solstice where they worshipped the winter months and the coming spring months and all this stuff, the winter solstice. And I know what Constantine did when he became leader. He was a politician, and he decided, he legalized Christianity, which sounds like a good thing. In some ways it is, and in many ways it wasn't. Because he also now claimed that he saw a cross up in the sky, and now he is a believer. And he marched his troops down through the river to baptize them. Now they're all Christians, so we are a Christian nation now. Because he said so. He then merged the whole holidays together. So you have the pagans worshiping. So let's put Jesus' birth at the same time as the pagans worshiping. That way we can all have a 3-day weekend. You know, instead of just the pagans having a 3-day weekend. So we can have one kind of thing. Whatever. But he did merge together. So we know that Jesus wasn't born December 25th. Right? It's not wrong to celebrate his birth that time of year, because we're not pagan worshipers or anything like that. We don't know exactly, but we do know when he died. And so the wise men, if they were from Persia, it's also very possible that they were Jewish. Right? Because Daniel wrote his prophecy, 9:24 through 27, in Babylon, in Persia. You know, at the time, 70 weeks, we talk about this in the other classes in terms of my people. And he breaks it down. Know, therefore, and understand from the going forth the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So 7, 60, 60, and 2. So that's 69 weeks. So from the going forth the command to start the temple being rebuilt is when Nehemiah left to go back to rebuild the walls. So the calendar began. Sir Robert Anderson, who was a detective for Scotland Yard in the 1800s, I guess, who was a self-proclaimed atheist, decided he was going to prove the Bible wrong, and he chose Daniel to prove it wrong again. And he started studying that, and he actually came up with the dates. March 14th, 445 BC is when Nehemiah left, to April 6th, 32 AD. Now, the calendar's not quite right and all that, but what he did show was 483 prophetical years, which are made up of 360 days a year, right? Not 365. So what you have to do is take from March 14, 445 to April 6, 32, multiply that by 365, and then divide it by 360 to come up with the 69 or 483 years. Right? And it does work out on paper. You could, there are formulas out there you can fit, but not going to spend a lot of time on that. But from the going forth to the death, the Messiah shall be 69 weeks total, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Now this is 60 and the 7 weeks, but after the not after this first division, but after the second division is what's saying. Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. So the Messiah will die, but he won't die for himself. He'll die for us. So now we have a timeline. So you're a Jew living in Babylon in the days of Daniel. You know Daniel's prophecy, and so you're telling your family and your children that from the going forth of command, this will be 483 years after that, before the Messiah dies. All right? You tell your grandchildren, then the grandchildren. Now it's in the days of Nehemiah. You're living in Babylon, or Persia, in the days of Nehemiah, and he left to go back to do what? Build the walls and streets, as the Bible said. So they're telling him now the clock has begun. So, son, he went back 483 years from now, Messiah's going to die. Right? He tells his son, he tells his son, he tells his son, tells his daughters too, I guess. Y'all can be included now. I'm old school when I say man for generic, and I'm not going to be able to overcome that, so bear with me. But passed on down the line. And as time got closer and closer, they're getting to wonder, okay, 300 years, Messiah's going to die. 200 years, Messiah's going to die. 100 years, Messiah's going to die. 50 years, Messiah's going to die. But the question now is what? When would he be born? They didn't know how old he was when he would die. We know because of history. But there was no prophecy saying what date of his birth. But they did know that he would be born in Bethlehem, and they knew he would die. So now it's 50 years. So what if it's 50 years before the Messiah dies? What are you going to be doing now? Because you could do this in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament. You could do this in the Old Testament. Well, what would you be praying for? A sign. Lord, give us a sign of when the Messiah would be born, because we want to see him. So 50 years now, 40 years, they're praying, praying, praying. 35 years, they're praying. Now it's 33 years. Jesus is born. The star, the shepherds saw, you can see that from Persia. And so they see this star at Jesus' birth, and from that point they start setting off on their journey. And we don't know how long it took them as far as that. Maybe after that, before they finally got everything together. There's not 3 wise men, in spite of what people tend to think. In fact, there's even, you can find their names on the internet. Caspar, Balthazar, and somebody else, I don't know, which of course is not scriptural in any way whatsoever. And so there weren't 3. I always say, if there were 3 wise men, they wouldn't go journeying through the desert at night, because if you're wise, you would take a whole lot more people with you. Okay? But nevertheless, they set off on their journey when they see the star, and they follow the star, and they come to Jerusalem, and they start inquiring about it, and they say, well, the Bible does say he'd be born at Bethlehem. And so they make their way to Bethlehem. So I believe the identity of these wise men are people from, Jewish people, who descendants of those who lived in Babylon, Persia, what have you, at the time, because it went through the Grecian rule and also Roman rule. But nevertheless, they were descendants of the ones that were there with Daniel, knew the prophecy of when he would die, started praying about when he'd be born, followed the star, and got to Jerusalem, then ended up in Bethlehem. So, to me, that's the only logical conclusion as to what took place here. Could I be wrong? Yes, I could be. But it does make sense that this would happen. Now, not all Jews returned, as I said. And we know not all Jews returned. When it came down even the book of Ezra, later on, before the Nehemiah, it says that many of the Jews remained. In days of Nehemiah, it says many of the Jews remained. Because many of them were born in captivity. You know, they couldn't go back to Israel because they'd never been to Israel. You can't go back to someplace you've never been. So they were born and in captivity and celebrated a lot of freedoms. I mean, you know, Esther became queen. She was a Jew. So they had their freedoms at that point. And so they just remained there until eventually. So the birth date was unknown, but the year of death was known. Had to be at the end of 483 years. So the Bible told them that. I heard people say, well, if we just knew when Jesus is coming back, if we knew exactly when he's coming back, then people would get right with God. Well, they knew when Jesus was coming the first time. Did they get right with God? No, the whole nation, they turned against him. So, you know, that is, and remember, we're saved by faith, not by sight. Nehemiah 2, and this is just a passage here, talks about when he left and all that, and the attitude that he had, and what a tremendous attitude Nehemiah had. You know, because when he found out that the walls and streets weren't built, what did he do?
Cried.
First thing is he left. And we should always be mindful of that. That when the work of God is not being accomplished like it should have, it should break our hearts. Instead of saying, I don't know why so-and-so don't fix this. Because that's what the people in Jerusalem were doing. They were living there with the temple that had been built by Zerubbabel and Joshua and the children of Israel for 70 years And every day they'd get up, they'd see the temple, and they'd see the walls and streets were collapsed, and everything was a mess. And the whole time they sat there and did not do one single thing about it. And then when Nehemiah got there, the Bible says that they had a mind to work. 7 years they didn't do nothing until somebody says, hey, you need to fix that wall. Okay. They needed a leader. They should have been able to do it already. If they had done it before, then Jesus would have came even earlier. You know? But nevertheless, this is what took place. So, Nehemiah chapter 2, 49 years to build walls and streets, to get everything accomplished that needed to be accomplished. The Bible said, remember, it's 7 years and 62, or 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And these are prophetical weeks. The word week in the Hebrew Bible, and even the Quran, or the language over there, the word week means sevens. So it could be 70, it says 77s are determined upon that people. It can be translated as a week, prophetical week, and that's correct. Our Bible's not wrong in that. So 77s then helps us understand that, you know, remember with Jacob and Rachel and Leah? He said, fulfill her week and you can have her. And he worked for her 7 years.
So a week is 7 years.
It can be. It all depends on context.
Okay.
Right? And so it could be 7 days, depending on what you're talking about, or it could be 7 years. And then the Bible says that he didn't get Rachel, he got Leah. And so Laban told him, he said, if you, in fact,
Is it Nehemiah 2? Is it?
yes.
Okay.
Genesis 29:27 says this. Fulfill her week, and he will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. So in this one verse it says, fulfill her week, 7 years. So we know then that Daniel's prophecy wasn't just talking about a year and a half, it's talking about truly 409 years total. But at the end of 483 years would be the triumphal entry. Zechariah 9 fulfilled. Jesus came riding in on the donkey, which was a sign of royalty. And the kings came in on donkeys. In our mind, we would think the king comes in on the big horse, like Jesus does when he comes back. So 7 weeks, or 49 years, 62 weeks, which is 400, well, total of that, what's it, 62 weeks times 7, 60 times 7, 42, 434. I think it is 134. The math is correct. Yeah. So 60 was 434 years plus 49, equals 483. Total of 70 weeks, so meaning that from triumphal entry to the end of 490 weeks, this would be the 7-year tribulation period. This is what was supposed to happen, right? All this would take place after 483rd year, would be the 484th up to the 490th. That's what was supposed to happen. But because the Jews as a nation rejected, then this is, remember, the movie's put on, there's an intermission. Right? And the church is the intermission. When the intermission is done, the movie starts back where it left off. Well, here's where it left off at the end of 483, and then when it starts back, it'll go to the 409. And as I said, Sir Robert Anderson came up with the dates at 445 BC, April 632. See, if you were to add these dates together as they stand, you would add 445 plus 32. Well, that would only be 477. So how does 477 become 483? Well, that's when you multiply 477 times 365 to get the days, and then you divide those days by Jewish calendar 360, and it goes back up to, and then you have to add for holy days. And you also, it can get complicated. It does work, but it gets complicated because it doesn't start till March 14th. Well, our New Year starts January, so you have to delete January, February, and 13 days. And then April the 6th, you have to delete from 32 to the end of the year. I mean, excuse me, from April 6th to the end of the year, as far as days. And so it gets a little complicated. It works, but it's a little bit more complicated than when you first see it. You think, well, how can 445 and 32 be 483? Well, it can be if you multiply it by 365 divided by 360, and then take away the days that aren't actually on that calendar time. That make sense?
No. Nope.
Okay. Well, that'll be on the test next week. So. It can be, like, you know, sometimes you don't have to always know what the answer is, you just know there is an answer. Okay? You know, you may not remember the exact stuff, but you know it does work out. And it does. I'm not trying to just gloss over this quickly. So the second coming at the end of the tribulation period, of course. Let me see something here. Maybe. We'll go ahead and stop right there because we've got a few minutes left anyway.